Sponsored by Wheeler Health's Better Choice program. More at wheelerhealth.org.
Helping you lead a healthier life. This is CURES.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the CURES Show, where we explore cutting-edge wellness from credible sources. I'm Kara Sunderland. September is actually self-care month, but it's also back to school. So we're going to combine both of those topics with some back-to-school basics to make sure that your children can thrive, especially with their mental health. And I'm happy to be joined by one of our favorites, and that is child psychologist Dr. Laura Saunders from the Institute of Living with Hartford Healthcare. Thanks so much for being with us, Doctor.
Hi, Kara. So happy to be here with you.
You know, before we get into the kids and what they need, it's always a big transition for the parents, too. I mean, I especially went to a huge transition sending my daughter off to college. But it's also just like everything is back to timing and more stress. I mean, it's a transition for mom and dad, too.
It is a transition and adjustment for everyone in the family, right? And you know, this is sort of the cycle of life, right? We have that transition and that adjustment in the spring or into early summer when, you know, school's out and schedules get more relaxed, but we have to plan some structure or in routine for, especially for the younger kids. But the same thing goes here at this time of year as well. So now it's, you know, getting back to the structure. Kids need to be in school. They need to learn. But it changes our, you know, internal timeline as well as parents.
And let's go right to the kids who might need even more help, and that is children with some underlying vulnerabilities. They might have learning differences. They might have anxiety or ADHD or even a learning disability. What's step one? Let's start with parents who maybe don't even have an official diagnosis yet.
So that's a great point, right? I use the term underlying vulnerabilities because all kids have different needs, have different strengths, have different weaknesses, and different needs. But as parents, we know which of our kids tend to need a little bit more. And it's okay that child A has different needs than child B, but you know what your child's vulnerabilities are. And even if it's not officially diagnosed, right? Something may have come up over the summer, or you've been noticing a pattern now that they're getting a little bit older. And, you know, if they're struggling with learning issues, if they're struggling with social issues, if they're struggling with managing their emotions or feeling a lot of anxiety and worry, which we know often comes out as in physical or somatic symptoms. So, you know, having ADHD, being neurodivergent in some way, it's someone on the autism spectrum, or you think they might be on the autism spectrum, but you're not quite sure. There's lots of kids with vulnerabilities, and it really is important on the part of the parents to be the advocate. The school's not going to pluck the child out and say, I think your child's on the autism spectrum. They're not going to do that. You as a parent really have to take that role as an advocate.
Okay, so help us with that. If you, I mean, I went through this with one of my children and we ended up getting a diagnosis, but I felt like I had a lot of people who were giving me good information, and I know that some people, it can take years if you don't know the right way to do it. So step one, you go to the school counselors and you say what kind of testing is available, because a lot of it, you could start with some free services if you're in a public school, right?
Absolutely. So we always start with the school support personnel, you know, school social worker, school psychologist, guidance counselor. If you're in high school, you start with those individuals. And, you know, like in high school, the guidance counselor would then connect you with teachers, because I love to get teacher input. The beautiful thing about teachers is that they have very often years and years and years of developmental experience, seeing, yes, your child actually falls within actually typical, or your child actually falls within being atypical, especially elementary school teachers. They're great at that. You know, so yes, your child's attention level and concentration and activity level seems to be well outside the bounds of a typical third grader, fourth grader, fifth grader, whatever it is. Yeah. So the teachers really can give you great information. You go to your school support personnel. If you feel like your child is, you know, and this is very early in the school year, so I don't want to say falling behind, but struggling in some way, they can do a little extra monitoring. They can do things that are on a low level before you have to start making direct requests for, say, psychological testing or an educational assessment, because those have to be more direct and formal requests.
And I'll just add one more comment that sometimes parents, I think, I've had friends who've been nervous to kind of get their kid labeled. And it's not so much that you want to label, but there's a lot of, if you have ADHD, you might be brilliant, but you might need some extra time on your math test to, if you have slow processing speed. There's reasons you would do this, and once you get these accommodations, they will follow your child all the way, even through college, allowing them to take a little longer on the SAT or whatever they need. It's good to have the option for these accommodations and things that can really make a difference.
Absolutely. We need, we need to be advocates for our children. But, I think some of that's coming from the old stereotypes. When I was in school, or, when you were in school, yeah, there were actually some negative stigma and stereotypes about kids who needed special help, which, was kind of a sad commentary on the way things were. So many more kids now need some accommodations, right? And some might say, well, why do so many kids need accommodations? Well, a more individualized education plan, right? Not an official IEP. That's if you have an IEP is for when you have an actual diagnostic category. It could be a learning disability. It could be a social emotional issue. But when we make education a little bit more individualized, it improves learning. And when you have good learning experiences, you continue on, right? A lot of kids with ADHD who've had a lot of negative experiences, just think about the hundreds of times they've been told to stop talking, stop tapping your pencil, all the negative feedback that they got. No, it's no wonder that they don't want to go on to college because they've gotten so much negative feedback. And you know what? Maybe they're better suited for a trade, but they get turned off to all experiences. So the better we can tailor our educational experiences, the better the overall educational experience.
All right, so there's our soapbox of making sure we can advocate, and if you've already gotten the diagnosis, the advocating I know continues. But let's go with also something basic that everybody needs. I would argue that I think kids with ADHD, they say even need it more, but sleep routines. Our focus isn't good, our mood isn't good. We really need to focus on getting people to get back to sleep.
Sleep routines are, we refer to it here oftentimes as the low-hanging fruit. We know our kids and we know which ones need a little bit more sleep and which ones can really kind of monitor their own. What you'd like to do is have more consistency in sleep. Obviously the little bit earlier you get to bed. I understand it's hard for high school kids, especially some of these kids that are taking, AP and early college experience kinds of classes. Disrupted sleep routines. I often tell the story. My son had a best friend in high school who would get home from like track or practice and then sleep for 4 hours, get up, work for 4 or 5 hours, and then sleep again for 4 hours. I mean, that's actually really, really hard on your brain and on your energy system to do that kind of a breakup in your sleep routine. So it's the low-hanging fruit. It's doing things to let your body know it's time to rest.
Yeah, and we also want to focus on nutrition. And I know kids sometimes they've been maybe eating a little loose in the summer, maybe drive-throughs more. But if you want to improve focus and energy and mood, nutrition matters.
Nutrition matters, right? Sleep and nutrition are the two easiest ways to address mood and energy. And again, I'm not talking about revamping your teenager's diet to be all like, vegetables and healthy, unprocessed carbohydrates, but it's trying to make some shifts. I know a lot of people say they don't want to eat in the morning, but honestly, there's a lot of data that says having a little something in the morning can help with your energy levels, to get you through the next few hours, whether it's a granola bar or an oatmeal. It doesn't have to be a full breakfast, but doing things to just increase a little bit of, adding a little vegetable, adding a little color into your family's routine. Doing little things to make changes is equally as important. I'm not talking about revamping everyone's diet.
Right, but I think the snacks are a big thing too, because you see so many times kids melting down or teen moods, and I found it's hard to get them sometimes to remember to do it, but you want to ask if the kids are melting down at the same time every day, could it be that they need a little break or they need some food?
Yeah, absolutely. It's knowing your child, knowing, your child is someone that actually needs to eat 4, 5, sometimes 6 times a day. They need to eat more smaller amounts. It doesn't have to be back to the 3 square meals. Sometimes eating smaller amounts really helps you maintain your energy, perhaps your blood sugar. I'm not even talking about like serious fluctuations in blood sugar, which would be a more serious medical problem. But my son is someone who always needed to eat every 2 hours and needs to have a little bit of protein every couple hours because that's how he maintains his energy.
Yeah, I feel the same. I remember the doctor telling my mom, make sure she's got cheese sticks or something. So whatever it is, obviously you don't want to be, not that you can't have some treats, but we might be able to change some mood and make people feel better with a little bit better food. Managing anxiety, and especially some kids get really worked up about grades, especially if they're going to high school. They're hearing all the focus on college, which I know we've done whole episodes on that, like just trying to really just work on the habits and not being so concerned about the outcome. But what do you do if kids are feeling anxious? Could be about grades, could be about a new teacher, could be about that they're not going to have friends at the lunch table.
So this is that time of year where all those adjustments are taking place, right? We're in the first week or two of school. There's lots and lots of internal adjustments. Some kids really roll with that. Some kids struggle with that. And knowing that your child is someone who struggles with it, is keeping, a little better eye on them. And when we say anxiety, I mean, it doesn't have to be debilitating anxiety. Very often, especially in younger kids, anxiety manifests itself in physical symptoms. So they have a stomach ache, they have a headache, their arm hurts, their shoulder hurts, whatever it is. They can't say, I'm anxious, because that might be a little bit too sophisticated way for them to identify how they're feeling, but it comes out in what we call somatic symptoms. So knowing that your child has a stomach ache every day when they get up, but they were fine when they went to bed last night, that's often a sign that they're anxious. So what I'd like to do in those situations and encourage parents to do is label it. I think you might be anxious about going to school today. Is there something that you're worried about? They, might say no, they might tell you, and saying, I'm confident that you don't have a virus. This is not something bigger. Let's give you something to settle your stomach, and then let's get you into school, right? So the best way is exposure, right? Getting them through that initial anxiety hump, because very often the anticipation of what's going to happen is far worse than what actually happens. So you see a lot of those morning stomach aches coming out about this time.
Yeah, okay. And also it's important to know that anxiety doesn't always look like worry. It could be that they're irritable and angry, especially boys, right? That can come out more as anger and outbursts, but it could be anxiety.
That's a great point. So as I said, especially for, younger children and even early teens, they don't necessarily say, I'm worried about, or I'm anxious about this. Often you see mood fluctuations, you see irritability, you see shortened temper, you see sometimes emotional withdrawal. So anxiety can manifest itself in a variety of different ways. It doesn't necessarily look like the way it may look in adulthood, which is, oh, I'm worried about this today, right? That's a more sophisticated level of identification that very often our children and our teens don't yet have.
Yeah. Okay. So again, name it to tame it. I love that saying, to remember it. But even if your kids can't name it, you would say something like what you just said. That script is, I think you might be anxious. Is there something that you're worried about? Did you know anxiety might make your stomach hurt? Or they might not know that. So even just telling them that could reduce the anxiety.
Yes. I mean, very often what we're trying to do is model the words, right? Model, validating their feeling. In those situations, I don't recommend you saying, no, you don't really have a stomach ache, right? No. In fact, that child might have a headache. They might have a stomach ache. Their arm might hurt. It, in fact, is bothering them. I'm not negating those symptoms. However, what we're saying is that I hear that you saying that you have a stomach ache. That stomach ache actually may be more related to anxiety or worry about the day, right? So you're better labeling it, but you're not saying, no, you don't have a stomach ache, let's just go, right? So you're identifying it, but you're also not saying, fine, stay home again today,
right?
Because then that reinforces the behavior. It's what we call an accommodation. So you're overly accommodating, and now you'll never get them to school.
Right. Okay. So they've learned they can stay home. So the other thing being that you want them. You could say, I read this the other day and it stuck with me, all feelings are welcome, all behavior is not. So the idea that it's an explanation, but not an excuse. Like, we're still going to go to school. What if your kid is really anxious? And I know you've talked about before that you just get them, to the sidewalk, or you get them in, if they're young, you just step by step. Can we say to our kids, just go, I want you to make it through the first part of the day. If you're really doing badly, call me at lunch. Or should we not even offer that?
So yes, you can break the day for kids that are super anxious, right? Really having a lot of physical or somatic symptoms. You can break it up into parts. But what I would recommend is that they go to the nurse, right? They go to the nurse and let the nurse then evaluate them. You don't have a fever, you haven't thrown up. Okay, so let's, here's some crackers and some water. So the elementary school nurse with my kids was awesome with this, right? She would have those, she would call frequent flyers. The kids that would come down, they'd need a little cup of water and a couple saltines. They obviously needed a little break, and then she'd send them back to class. So you check in with the nurse. Let's see if there's any physical symptoms that are debilitating enough to go home. I don't want them calling me, because then they're going to prey upon my potential weaknesses, right? It's hard for parents to hear that their child is suffering, and I use suffering in air quotes. But let's have a medical professional then evaluate it. Sometimes they need a little break, and then break it up, try again for another couple class periods, and then see what happens. So breaking things up into smaller chunks makes it a little less overwhelming than having to do an entire day.
Yeah.
And
often they get there and it's not as bad as you think. And they often give the worst of it to the moms, and teachers might say they're fine. So I want to talk about peer relationships. That's a big deal, especially as kids get older. But first, let's take a quick moment to hear from one of our sponsors.
Struggling with gambling? Wheeler Health's Better Choice program offers personalized support and treatment to help you regain control. Visit WheelerHealth.org to learn more and take the first step towards recovery today.
All right, we are back talking about some back-to-school basics, especially with September being Self-Care Month. We want to help our kids thrive, and we're here with Child Psychologist Saunders, and we're talking about peer relationships. Those are so tricky. I mean, I think we all remember being excluded. I think it's so much worse now because we didn't know till a few days later. Now it's like every kid can see on their Snap Map if they weren't invited somewhere, or they're not on the group text, or it can be so tricky, especially among teen years.
It really is very difficult. I am someone who believes that social skills and peer relationships are really life skills. And in my mind, it's equally as important as learning academics, because we have to get along with people for the rest of our lives. It is so much harder now when about, times where you've been excluded. So learning to weather those a little bit. I always tell young people, all you need to do is have one friend. One friend is a protective factor. So if there's one person that you can focus on, and that's the person that you hang out with, or that's the person you invite to do something, that's a starting point, because then they can connect you to someone else. We know that kids who have a little bit more anxiety or have some social difficulties really struggle with the unstructured times, like, recess, or, phys ed time, if that's less structured. Lunchtime is super unstructured. I mean, some high schools actually are just scheduling kids through lunch. They're not even, they're not even sort of making them tolerate that lunchtime, which I have mixed feelings about. But, for that child that does struggle with social skills, school support personnel are really well versed in, sometimes in the elementary school, having like a small group, a little dyad or a little triad, and working on social skills and peer relationships.
How do we handle when our kid's being excluded, especially, let's say it's a mean girl syndrome. All of a sudden, your child is just not invited at the lunch table, or they thought they had a friend group and they're not included. And you're wondering, well, you obviously feel awful, and you're thinking, who do I call? Do I talk to the teacher? Do I talk to another person's mom? Do I let them handle it? When do we step in, or don't we?
So that's a really kind of fine line. My general guideline in that situation is, unless it's really problematic, really try to let the child handle it on their own. You can work on some language and some wording skills around like, hey, can I do this with you the next time you do it, right? So working on some things, but not like then complaining, you always leave me out, because then, that's really going to, I think, come back more negatively. So trying as much as possible to let your child manage it. It becomes different if there's a situation where they're being bullied or they're being harassed, and it's now really affecting their ability to function. But as much as possible, I don't encourage the parents to step in those situations and try to fix it for them. That doesn't mean that you can't reach out to the teacher or the, school support person and say, my child's coming up with a lot of these like really different scenarios where they're being excluded. Can you give me some like verification that that's happening, or give me some feedback, or, what are you observing? Because they might be observing something totally different.
Right. So sometimes maybe our child's complaints or feelings, not that we're not going to say they're all valid, but they may not be totally accurate. And then we need to teach them how to navigate this, which I just want to say, and my heart goes out to, all the parents who are dealing with, they don't have the kid who's maybe the one that everyone wants to be friends with or whatever, but like the learning difficulties, or if a child has anxiety or ADHD, which could create, maybe blurting out or different behavioral issues, they're all wonderful kids, but they might be a little bit more behind in navigating social situations. And so you might have to have some more advocacy.
Yeah, a little more advocacy. Sometimes, there's things that you can do. Getting your child involved in something that is outside of school. It could be sports. And again, you're not getting kids involved in sports because you think they're going to be pro athletes. You get kids involved in sports and other activities because you think it gives them a common set of interests with someone else. So now you and a friend love to do the art club. And so yes, now that's something in common. Or you like to do sports, because sports give you all sorts of different skills. Even if you're not a good athlete, it gives you teamwork skills, it gives you communication skills, it gives you some discipline. So it gives you a set of skills that really are good for your lifelong need to get along with other people.
Okay, so when we're talking about just school climate, one of the things that you mentioned is that parent involvement is key. How do you mean? How do we get involved? I know the older the kids get, it's a little harder. They don't want us in the school as much.
Right. So what a lot of the research shows is that the more parents are involved in a school system, the greater the learning environment is. The greater the learning environment is, the better the academic scores, right? And that's, a lot of administrators and school systems are evaluated on their academic success. So, whether it's elementary school age, connecting with the teacher, being involved in any kind of PTO or PTA. Same thing goes for middle school and high school, being involved in events. If you can be that parent that volunteers for something, the more involved you are in a kind of neutral or positive way, the better it is overall for your child and for the whole learning environment.
Yeah, so when they're young, it's nice, right? They want you to come in, you can bring snacks. Sometimes you can even be at the lunch table and observe things. But as people are getting older, of course, your kids don't want you there, but then they don't maybe want you. So it's more just knowing, keeping in touch with the teacher. Then the other problem that we have, I'll call it the power school syndrome, is we didn't used to get this, but parents now get alerts the minute their child has a late assignment or a grade or ding, ding, ding on your app, and you're trying to be involved. So you're looking at power school, but that can actually be too much, right? Like, how do we handle when you see they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing?
So that can be a pretty significant problem. And again, your child, if your child might maybe miss something, but they generally make it up, or they do it a little bit differently, or they need to communicate to the teacher. You want to build in independence. So the more you kind of hover and be that helicopter parent, or the lawnmower parent where you just clear the way for them to move through, the worse it will be for them as they get older and try to develop their own independent skills. Yeah. So unless you have a child who has very significant learning issues, or the school's not following an IEP, then it's helping them be more accountable. But checking in, saying, how did this week go? I got a couple notifications. Did you take care of that? So that's checking in, but that's not on their backs monitoring them, doing the homework, with them or for them, especially in high school. Those kids need to learn that independence and be a little bit more on their own.
So in our last 3 minutes together, let's talk about college. You've already done it twice. I just did it. And so, we get to the point of like, okay, they're done, but it's a huge transition. So how do parents help navigate that? What can we do to support them? We certainly don't have the same access, but I'm wondering, we're not just totally hands off anymore either, right? Or are we?
Well, it's a bit of a mixed bag because it's a little different freshman year. That's a big change and adjustment. I think first semester freshman year is really, really hard for college kids, especially kids that go away to school. The learning is immense, and sometimes that, causes them to regress a little bit. And, it's not uncommon in those first couple weeks, they say they want to come home. I try to keep them at school as much as possible, but that doesn't mean they don't need a little bit of a break, but you don't want them coming home regularly. So it's that kind of cutting of the cord a little bit more, letting them solve things on their own. Sometimes I just stop asking, how are you? Because then I get a litany of things that I have no control over. I could say, I'm sorry that's happening to you. I can do some validating things, but you don't want to jump into fixing things for them. For you, there's like a real emptiness. And so, joining a book club, finding a hobby, doing things to invest in your time and energy, connecting with friends you haven't connected with in a while. So it does take some work on the parents' part to fill that emptiness a little bit.
Yeah. Well, we only have 90 seconds left, but give me the 90 seconds. My daughter, thankfully, is not going through this right now, but I know she's got some friends who are really homesick. What do you do?
You take a deep breath. You say, I'm sorry to hear you're homesick. Get through your classes today. All colleges have college fairs where they try to get you connected. They need to get connected outside of their classes to other activities in school.
Yeah. Dr. Laura Saunders, always a wealth of information. And if you're listening to CURES, we hope that you'll like and subscribe the podcast and share it with your friends and family so we can grow this work. So thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Saunders. See you again soon.
Thank you, Carol.
Have a great day, everyone, and be well.